And welcome in to another edition of the Andy Mazer podcast. I'm Andy, and John Owens is kind enough to join us here. John, one of the co-authors of Chili Dog MVP, Dick Allen, the 72 White Sox, and a transforming Chicago. First of all, I want to thank you for taking some time here. And uh, why write this book? What about Dick Allen was so intriguing to you?
Well, I had the good fortune to meet him back in 2012 when the White Sox were celebrating the 40th anniversary of that 1972 team. If you remember, they wore the red pinstripes on Sundays, and Dick made a rare appearance back in Chicago during late June to celebrate that team on one Sunday. And I had the good fortune of meeting him then. My co-author, David Fletcher, knew him very well. And he was the guy who actually sort of arranged for that 1972 reunion. And Dick it was a wonderful person, and he was a wonderful player. My co-author, who again knew him very well and is a physician and treated him from time to time, was with him during his last days in 2020. And after Dick's death and the two disappointing recent attempts to get him into the Hall of Fame, my co-author and I felt, it's time to really put Dick back on the map, because he was so important to the White Sox organization at a time when the team was really struggling and in danger of moving. So he really, regenerated the fan base and brought people back to Comiskey, and we felt that he needed to be celebrated for that, and we needed to remember how important Dick was to this city and to the White Sox organization.
Dick kind of seemed to be an enigma of sorts, because all the talent in the world, and he could probably do anything he wanted. Reading your book, I mean, an R&B singer, a basketball player, I mean, he probably could have done anything he wanted to do. It was that misrepresentation, I think, that kind of set him back a little bit, and maybe is keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. Is that something that is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. He was, an interesting individual. He grew up in Wampum, Pennsylvania, and a surrounding where back in those days in the 1940s and 50s, most aspects of American society, most institutions were segregated. But Dick grew up in an area, Wampum, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, where it was an interracial atmosphere. He grew up with Chuck Tanner, for instance, his future manager, the Tanner family, and they competed against each other. The Allen family competed against the Tanner family, and those two families were friendly growing up. And then he dealt with the culture shock after being signed by the Philadelphia Phillies. He dealt with a lot of issues with that organization. First, they recognized his talents, but they left him open to the expansion draft of 1962. Which was an insult to Dick. He had been signed by the Phillies in 1960, and then they sent him down to Little Rock, Arkansas, to play to play AAA baseball. He was one of the first African Americans to play in Little Rock, and they didn't really prepare him for that, and he suffered as a result. He had to deal with the racist fans and just a racist atmosphere, and he was a sensitive guy, and he had trouble dealing with that. And then moving to the majors in Philadelphia, which is a tough media town, playing out of position at first at third base, where he made a number of errors that, even though he was from the start in 1964, when he started his rookie season with the Phillies, he was an offensive phenomenon. He had issues defensively at first at third base before he was eventually moved to first, and he was criticized by the media for his sort of sensitive, aloof personality and some of his quirks, which included not necessarily taking batting practice. Because he had a good reason for that. He said, I can't, batting practice doesn't help me because I'm going to see pitches half speed. and not full speed like I would during a game. So he didn't take batting practice. But these are things that he was definitely an iconoclast, and he suffered because of that with the media and with fans, and as a result, you say, Andy, he became sort of an enigma with both the media and fans, especially in Philadelphia, and in the long run, the fact that he had a difficult relationship with the media, specifically on the East Coast, that hurt him, both as a player and in as numerous attempts to get him into the Hall of Fame. It hurt him then too.
The amazing thing about that story, and I've been around baseball pretty much my entire professional career, and have had a chance to cover some of those enigmas, and you get close to these people and you think to yourself, this guy's not as bad as everybody said he was. And I watch a guy in the clubhouse and I watch how he interacts with his teammates. And he has such a different persona away from all of that that the media never sees. And it's such an unfortunate situation that the media could never get to see how he reacted with his teammates and how he interacted with others around the clubhouse, because that would have put him in such a different light. And it's just amazing to me how that transpired.
That's exactly right, Andy. Yeah, he had a great reputation with teammates. Your old colleague Steve Stone talks on occasion about how funny Dick was, and to a man, with the exception of maybe a couple of players like the Rick Reichart, his teammate on the 1972 White Sox, with the exception of people like him and maybe a few others. Frank Thomas, the original Frank Thomas, he got into an argument with him. Frank Thomas was a ball player in the 50s and 60s with the Pirates and Phillies, and he did not get along with Dick. But for the most part, he had great relationships with his teammates. He wasn't necessarily an outgoing guy, but he was always there for his teammates when he was in the clubhouse. And he was a funny guy, a very funny guy, and he was a helpful guy. Guys like Goose Gossage, he name checked Dick when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2008, calling him the best player he ever saw. And Goose Gossage credited Dick for helping him as a pitcher, encouraging him to do things like throw inside to batters. And others like Carlos May, credited Dick with helping him, with hitting and with base running. Dick was a 5-tool player. He could do everything well, and he was helpful with teammates and helping make his teammates better. So he was misunderstood by some in the media, but not by his teammates who championed him. Although I will say the media in Chicago, that was probably his greatest media relationships occurred here in Chicago. He became friendly with guys like Bob Marcus, who was a longtime writer for the Tribune. So he did have some decent relationships with the media here in Chicago, which is why he appreciated Chicago probably more than any of the other cities that he played in.
So getting into Chicago was kind of a chore of itself. The holdout in spring training, and I'm sure that did not do much to dispel some of the things that were kind of preceding him at that point. But as I read in your book, I mean, obviously the relationship with Chuck Tanner played a huge role in that, and he wanted to get what was his. And I don't see why that's such a shock to people.
Right. I mean, that was another thing about Dick, and it was something that other players also admired him for, is that he knew his self-worth. He learned this from his oldest brother, Coy, who was his earliest, agent. He had other agents, obviously, after that, but his brother Coy always told him, make sure that you're recognized for your talents when you have to negotiate for a salary. So as a result, Dick would hold out every year. And it was wise of him to do this, because he, by 1970 and 71, he was one of the top paid players in Major League Baseball. And by 1972, he was, when he signed with the Sox, the top paid player in baseball. So yes, he definitely knew his self-worth. But he did come to Chicago. One reason that he came to Chicago was because of Chuck Tanner. As I mentioned earlier, he knew the Tanner family from early on in wampum. They knew each other, and Chuck had been campaigning for Dick from the start when he was hired by the White Sox along with Roland Heeman from California, from the California Angel system back in late 1970. They initially the team wanted to engineer a deal where Dick was traded. Dick was at St. Louis at the time, and they wanted to engineer a deal where Louis Aparicio would go to the Cardinals for Dick, but the Cardinals turned that down. So there was always a push to get from Chuck Tanner to get Dick Allen on the White Sox, and they were able to do that in December of 1971 when they traded another great player who's not in the Hall of Fame, Tommy John, for Dick. And it came. He did hold out, and he held out during a time when baseball was on strike. It was with the first strike of the modern baseball era. And Dick came back when the players were still on strike. So that was sort of ironic there. But it was just, it was something that was meant to be because of the relationship that Dick had with Chuck Tanner.
And as you guys write in the book too, I mean, his mom had a lot to do with getting him back to it because he respected her opinion so much. She's like, "Hey, go play baseball."
That's correct. Yeah, Dick, initially he looked at the White Sox team from 1971, and it was a overachieving team that didn't quite reach 500 with a lot of young players. And Dick was, a veteran by that time. He was 30 years old, and he had dealt with a lot of, poor Phillies teams after that first team in 1964. A disappointing team that was overtaken by the Cardinals in the last week of the season. That was after that things went down with the Phillies, and he was looking for an organization where he could win, and he didn't really think the White Sox could win. And it took his mom to tell him, Chuck, you've got your friend Chuck Tanner here. You've got to go to the White Sox.
And what a time that was for the White Sox and White Sox fans. It started bringing people to Comiskey Park, as you pointed out, and it kind of made the South Side the baseball mecca of Chicago.
Yeah, the South Side, as you know well, South Side fans and the South Side well. The team had been very successful in the 1950s and 1960s, the famous Go-Go White Sox, and they consistently outdrew the Cubs during that time. But after 1967, in the year where the White Sox were in the pennant race until the last week of the season, a race that Boston eventually won. They went up against Detroit and Minnesota. They were all bunched together within that last couple of weeks of the season. After that season, things really went down. There was always whispers about the White Sox leaving Chicago at that time. And in fact, owner Art Allen Jr., had a handshake deal with Bud Selig in Milwaukee to move the White Sox to Milwaukee in 1969 to replace the Braves, who had left Milwaukee a few years before. And another iconoclast and unsung hero of this book, a man named John Allen, who eventually bought the team from his brother Art. He was a minority owner before that. He was also instrumental in the resurgence on the South Side because he remained committed to keeping the White Sox in Chicago and in Comiskey Park. Unlikely because he grew up, he was a part of a brokerage firm. The Allen Company had a brokerage firm on LaSalle Street for years, and Bill Veeck, originally brought the Allens into the fold when he owned the team back in the late 50s and early 60s. But it was John Allen who said, I want to keep this team in Chicago. I don't want a publicly funded stadium, which is what his brother was pushing for and what, other city officials were pushing for. He said, I want to stay at Comiskey Park. I want to stay in the third largest market in the country. And we're going to bring fans back to Comiskey Park. And one of the ways of doing this was getting a marquee star to bring fans back. So he and Roland Hemond and Chuck Tanner were instrumental in getting Dick back to getting Dick to Chicago and bringing fans back to the South Side, which is what he did. And make no mistake, the Sox were in serious danger of moving back then. The bottom dropped out in 1970 when they lost more than 100 games and couldn't draw 500,000 fans. I think it was 495,000 fans that they drew in the 1970 season. So it took Dick and people like John Allen and other iconoclasts who we mentioned in the book, people like Harry Carey and Nancy Faust. It took people like that to bring the fans back to the South Side and Comiskey Park.
That's a perfect lead into where I wanted to go next, because it's so hard for, I'm sure, for people to believe that one guy could have such an impact on keeping a franchise together. But it was all the things that were happening as a result of him being there that were happening around him. You mentioned Harry Carey. You mentioned Nancy Faust, who comes up with the walk-up music that everybody hears to this day. This young organist comes in there and figures out a way to honor Dick Allen by playing Jesus Christ Superstar as he steps to the plate.
Nancy Faust was and is, because she's still active, just a brilliant person, a brilliant musician who started with the White Sox in 1970. I believe she was 24, 25 years old, but she came from a musical background. Her mom was a well-known performer. She performed for the WLS National Barn Dance for years. So she was a known commodity here in Chicago. And Nancy had always taken the keyboards early and had played at different events, including events for the Allen family, as I mentioned, a wealthy family out of Wilmette. And that sort of brought her to the attention of the White Sox. So she was hired in the 1970 season, that season when they didn't draw 500,000 fans. And she was out originally in the center field bleachers of Old Comiskey, where no one was sitting. And she got a chance to, experiment while she was on the job. There was a guy who was with the White Sox in the 60s, a guy named Shea Torrent, an organist who eventually moved on to California. And he was a really sharp organist. And Nancy had listened to him, but she took it to another level by, as you mentioned, walk-up music. She started that early on, back in 1970, doing little musical themes for players, both for the White Sox and opposing teams, when they walked up to the plate. Tunes that were identifiable with the player, that were identifiable with their name, with something they did in the news recently. And then she started commenting on the game musically. And this was something that was not, totally new for Major League Baseball. You had organists like Shea Torrent, and the Brooklyn Dodgers had Gladys George, but there was no one who was, making these witty comments on the game like Nancy was. And it was immediately noticed. It was noticed by another man who had just started with the White Sox, Harry Carey, who started after a legendary career in St. Louis. He was forced out of St. Louis for controversial reasons, and then moved to Oakland for a year. Didn't get along with Charlie Finley. Jack Brickhouse, the legendary broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs and White Sox, told Harry, there's this opening in Chicago. Why don't you come to Chicago? The only problem was WMAQ had dropped the White Sox from their radio station after 1970. So Harry was forced to be on a radio in sort of a loose amalgamation of suburban radio stations in LaGrange and Evanston and Joliet. And yet he was able to build a fan base in 1971, build back the fan base with his dynamic broadcasting. Everybody knows Harry's dynamic style. and while he was broadcasting in 1971, Harry made a connection immediately with Nancy Faust. He noticed what she was doing. with these little musical cues, and he would promote that on the air, and he would say, "Hey, listen to what the organist is doing. She really gets it." And they soon connected, and they developed their own traditions. For instance, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
Okay, Nancy. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the ground. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack. I don't care if I ever get back, or it's root for the White Sox. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
So it was the combination of these people providing stadium entertainment and pushing the Sox back into the mainstream and the media, who also really helped energize the team in the early 70s.
And again, it's the influence of Dick Allen that kind of brings it all to the forefront and kind of gives it credibility and notoriety. And it's amazing, as you pointed out too, with Nancy Faust. I think probably being as young as she was at that time and being in tune to all the music that was going on at the time and trying to introduce that into a ballpark. I mean, we hear it now. I mean, now it's all DJs and it's all recorded music rather than the actual organ music. But that was her back in the day.
Right. Unfortunately, that stadium, that all the DJs and the multimedia is what kind of forced her out of her position with the White Sox back in 2010. But yeah, I mean, she was a one-man musical phenomenon doing all this stuff back in 1970, 71, 72. So way ahead of her time. And she was a very young woman, but I mean, although she's not the greatest at reading music, she's just a musical genius because of the number of songs that she retains in her was able to retain in her head, and the ability to call back these little musical cues for each individual player, both on the White Sox and on opposing teams.
Yeah, it's a lost art to me in a ballpark. I love going and listening to the organ music rather than a lot of the screaming loud stuff that you hear now. But I guess that puts me in a different category age wise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're talking about the 1972, which was not too far removed here in the city from the Democratic National Convention in '68 and all the unrest that happened there. And the '70s were a tumultuous time, not only here in Chicago but also around the country as well. And I know this is a big part of your book as well. It's not just Dick Allen, the baseball player. It's about Dick Allen and what he meant to the transformation of this city, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and as you mentioned, there was civil unrest and change throughout the nation, and it was definitely prevalent in Chicago and on the South Side, where Comiskey Park was located and where Guaranteed Rate Field is located today. So we look at the state of the South Side and the city at that time. It was, as you mentioned, a few years after the 1968 Democratic Convention, where there was political unrest on the streets on Michigan Avenue. And then you look at all the civil unrest that was going on in Chicago, racially motivated civil unrest that was happening everywhere. After Martin Luther King was assassinated in April, there were riots in all the urban areas, including Chicago, primarily on the west side, a little bit on the south side. So there was you had this backdrop of upheaval and change in 1970 and 1971 and 1972, and that definitely affected the White Sox. It probably affected their attendance because, as we know, the White Sox are located on the south side. They were sort of a boundary in the same way that the Dan Ryan Expressway is sort of a boundary, where you have a predominantly a African American population to the east of the ballpark, and you have a primarily white ethnic population to the west. So upheaval and racial unrest was immediately noticeable. Some people attributed that for the downgrade in attendance at Comiskey Park in 68 and 69 and 70, although there were definitely other factors involved, and I don't think that was the major reason for the attendance drop. So this was something that Chicago was dealing with in 70 and 71. You had Mayor Richard J. Daley, who was beginning his 17th year as the mayor of Chicago, a longtime White Sox fan, not necessarily a season ticket holder every year, but he made many of the games. And as Bill Veeck said, he was the only mayor I ever met who never asked for any comps or free tickets. He believed in paying for his family when he entered into the ballpark, and he loved the White Sox. So he was the all powerful last of the all powerful big city mayors, but his power was dwindling. In 1972, you had a lot of resistance, both from people who were sort of in his universe, like Ed Burke and Ed Verdoliak, aldermen, who basically were part of Daley's camp, but thought that he was getting older and that he needed some challenges. And you had other people like Bill Singer, the alderman who grew up in the South Shore and later became 43rd Ward alderman, a young activist named Jesse Jackson who had moved here a few years before. The SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, had him establish an organization here, and he became a renegade from the SCLC and sort of branched off and created his own organization, Operation Push. And he and Singer were pushing Daley and his delegates and pushing for a more diverse group of delegates who would represent the Democratic Party in Illinois in the 1972 convention. So that's a story that was going on throughout, how the sort of the younger, more diverse group of politicians here in Chicago were finally pushing the entrenched political machine led by Daley, and would eventually not force him out, but give him more trouble than he ever had politically. So you had a lot of political infighting during 1972. You had Daley's son, Richard M. He's starting his political career at the time. So there was a lot of political drama. And then there was drama in the neighborhoods not far from Comiskey Park. You're seeing a lot of change going on, racial change. African Americans had been limited due to the restrictive racial covenants to a specific area on the South Side called the Black Belt. But by 1968, due to the Open Housing Act, the Federal Open Housing Act, and other things, Black families were starting to move into previously all-white neighborhoods like Gage Park and West Englewood and other areas like that. And that was creating a lot of tension. We cover in Chili Dog MVP a near riot that took place at Gage Park High School, which is just a mile from Comiskey, due to the fact that you've had Black students starting to populate the school, bringing about resentment from the longtime white ethnics who attended that school. So there was a lot of strife and a lot of change going on in Chicago when Dick Allen joined the White Sox in 1972.
It all does come back down to sports. And what always interests me is the way that even people that don't really follow it every day, say baseball, basketball, football, whatever, I always go back to the 1980 Olympic hockey team as a unifier. And I always felt that if a team in your city is doing really well and everybody kind of jumps on the bandwagon, and forget about the fact that they're maybe not diehard fans, who cares? I mean, everybody's kind of in it together. It just seems like sports is that great unifier. And that had something to do with that 72 season as well.
That's exactly right. I mean, you had all these issues near the ballpark, but due to Dick Allen and due to other factors like Harry Carey and Nancy Faust, that the fan base was really re-energized in 1972. They drew 1 million fans for the first time since 1965, over 1 million fans. And that fan base was probably the most diverse fan base in the city and one of the most diverse fan bases in the country. Dick Allen was shocked when he came to Chicago and saw the mix of Latino and African American and white fans who would come to Comiskey Park. And, this was something that he specifically referenced. He said, I've never seen anything like this in any of the cities that I played before, in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, St. Louis. This is a different fan base. And it was, when White Sox fans have a winner to celebrate, they definitely will support their team, and that was the case in 1972. It was specifically Dick was a must-see event. You didn't want to miss what he did at the plate when he came up. So he was the main energizing factor behind a fan base that would come back after a number of losing seasons.
And you mentioned Dick Allen and the type of talent that he was, a five-tool type of player. I'm trying to think if there's anybody of today's ilk that could even rival some of the things that Dick Allen was able to do, not just with a bat, but with his legs in the field. I mean, he was a heady base runner and just a great baseball guy.
He was beyond, he was beyond compare. He wasn't necessarily a base stealer, but he knew how to run the bases, how to cut the bases, and that's something that other teammates would study. I can't think of anybody quite like him either, Andy. And then when you throw into the mix his charismatic nature, even though he was a quiet guy, he was someone, when he was in a room, you knew he was in a room. He was an extremely stylish dresser. And he had a sense of authority. He was a, normal sized guy. He was only like 5'11", but he was chiseled. In the days when, there wasn't a lot of weight training and other health related factors, conditioning coaches and people like that. He was an incredible specimen, an incredible physical specimen. So he was really a unique guy. I can't think of anybody who really matches him today. And he was it was the age of the pitcher, but he was from 64 to 74, there was no one better. Maybe Henry Aaron from 64 to 74. His OPS was 940. Only Aaron's 941 OPS was higher during that span. His slugging percentage, 554 from 64 to 74, second only to Hank Aaron's 561 slugging percentage. So he was perhaps the most dynamic offensive player of his time, again in an age when pitchers dominated, especially in the 60s when pitchers dominated. So he's really just a unique character in the game.
You mentioned too about the authoritative stance and just the kind of you look at him and you revere him just because of what he's been able to do on the field. There's a lot of guys that probably would take that and keep it to themselves and just go about their own business. If someone wanted to ask you a question, they could be a little grizzled about it. But and we kind of touched on it too with Goose Gossage, but also reading in your book, Dusty Baker, another guy that as a young player really leaned into Dick Allen, and Dick Allen saw that this was a kid that was not just happy to be in the big leagues. He wanted to work and he wanted to be better, and he really helped him.
Right. I mean, you hear that a lot from teammates on the White Sox, on the 72 White Sox, especially Carlos May would meet with Dick after games at a local tavern or at Dick's hotel room when he lived in the southwest suburbs. He lived at least, I believe, in the 1972 season, he lived in a hotel in the suburbs, and then he moved to a townhouse in the suburbs with his brother Hank, who joined him on the team later in 72. But his hotel room or his townhouse was was always open for players who wanted to visit him and have a few drinks and talk about the game after the game. So he was definitely a mentor to a lot of players, specifically his own teammates.
Okay, I'm leading up to the chili dog incident. I want to get to that in a second. I don't want to forget about it because obviously that's the title of your book, and it just had an anniversary a couple of weeks ago. Uh,
That's right.
we mentioned, that he moved around, and Philadelphia was kind of a tough town for him. When he was called Richie, Richie Ashburn was also, was there before, and that's a tough thing to live up to for anybody,
Right.
let alone have that name. It was interesting too in your book about how when he went to Los Angeles, how a lot of players go to Los Angeles because they love the scene in LA. He was quite the opposite, wasn't he?
Right. Well, yeah, the Dodgers was, for an African American player, especially back then, going to the Dodgers was the ultimate experience. Because that's where Jackie Robinson debuted. They always had competitive teams. Dick was excited about going to LA, but he couldn't deal with the relatively conservative culture, especially the culture led by Walter Alston. He never really developed a connection with Walter Alston, and he never really developed a connection with his teammates. And as a result, he was traded after only 1 year.
And
And
then
he was 1 year with the Dodgers after 1 year with the St. Louis Cardinals. Another great team, which you think he would have enjoyed being a part of. And he did enjoy being a part of the Cardinals. The Cardinals, though, probably the Cardinals weren't too thrilled with his unique individualist approach to the game. So, he had in a way, the White Sox were probably the best team to deal with him at the time, because you had a young front office led by a very young Roland Hemond underneath Stu Holcomb, and then you had a young manager who knew Dick very well. So I don't think there would be another organization at that time who would have been as welcoming as the White Sox.
that trade from Philadelphia to St. Louis, kind of with involving Dick Allen, actually indirectly led to a whole lot of stuff with Kurt Flood and challenging the reserve clause because he didn't want to report to Philadelphia. And it's weird that he became part of that a little bit unknowingly.
Weird and ironic, because Marvin Miller was also, who represented Kurt Flood in his attempt to break the restrictive system that would basically bind one player with one team. Marvin Miller also respected Dick Allen for his unique ability to hold out for what he felt he was worth. So it is ironic that Dick would end up being traded for Kurt Flood, who refused to report to the Phillies because of he didn't want to play there. He had business interest already in St. Louis. Kurt Flood did, and he knew about Dick's issues with Philadelphia fans and media. Philadelphia was seen as sort of a graveyard at that time by players, so he didn't want to report to Philadelphia. So yeah, it's very ironic that Kurt Flood was the guy who ended up being traded for Dick, and Kurt Flood wouldn't report to the Phillies eventually.
One more before we get to the coup de grace. I think it was Oakland. Was it Oakland where he wore the city that he was born in on the back of his jersey, Wampum, instead of his name?
That's correct. Wampum, I believe Wampum 60, which was the year he was signed by the Phillies. Yeah, it was meant to specifically be a tribute to where he grew up and his tribute to his roots. And Charlie Finley, to his credit, let him do this, although Charlie Finley would eventually be the guy who would pretty much drive him out of baseball. He had an unsuccessful 1977 season with the A's, and ironically, he would end his career with the A's here in Chicago at Comiskey Park when he basically refused to enter a game, and instead went to the showers. And he was caught by Charlie Finley during the game in the showers. Charlie Finley, of course, was based in Chicago and had an insurance office in Chicago. And Charlie Finley proceeded to suspend Dick and fine him without pay. And Dick said, "That's it. That's it. I'm through with baseball. Through with playing for Oakland, at least."
Well, the clubhouse kind of leads us right into the title of the book and the Chili Dog MVP, and that's such a great story. Was it June 4th of 1972, a doubleheader against the Yankees? He played in Game 1, but did not play in Game 2. Correct? I'll let you take it from there.
Right. June 4th, 1972. So the White Sox at that time, they were in the AL West. They were in the AL West with a lot of West Coast teams, and their primary rival that year was beginning their dominant run, the Oakland A's. The Oakland A's, led by Reggie Jackson and Joe Rudy and Sal Bando and Catfish Hunter and Vida Blue. But the underdog White Sox behind Dick Allen were competing with Oakland for the division lead. On June 4th, 1972, they were playing a doubleheader against for years, for decades, the most hated rival of the White Sox, the New York Yankees. And the Yankees were sort of down in the AL East at this time, but they were still, a recognized name. And as a result of Bat Day, and as a result of the excitement generated by the team, over 51,000 fans came to Comiskey Park that day. It was one of the largest baseball attendances to that time and to this day in Chicago. I'm not sure what was larger. I think there were 2 or 3 more games that were you had larger attendances. Anyway, it's Bat Day, 51,000 fans at Comiskey Park. Dick played in the first game, which the White Sox won, and he had played in every game that year and was due for a rest. So Chuck Tanner kept him out of Game 2, much to the chagrin of owner John Allen, who was at Comiskey Park that day and immediately ran down and said, "Why are you resting our meal ticket, Dick Allen?" And Chuck said, we need to give him a rest. He's played every game this year. He's beat. He's carrying the team. So Dick was in the clubhouse, first in the whirlpool, where he was relaxing. And then after a stint in the whirlpool, he sat at his locker and was preparing and then eating a chili dog that was prepared by one of the clubhouse attendants. He's in the middle of a chili dog, eating that chili dog while the Sox were losing to the Yankees 4-2. In the top of the ninth, Chuck Tanner had his bat boy Rory Clark find Dick, who was still, chowing down on the chili dog created by the clubhouse, made by the clubhouse attendant. Rory Clark says, "Chuck wants you to pinch hit, so you have to get out now." So Dick rushed. He had his jersey on. He had dribbled. The legend has it he dribbled some chili dog juice on his jersey. Ran out to pinch hit with 2 men on, a man on first, a man on second. The White Sox down 4-2, and the Yankees ace reliever Sparky Lyle on the mound. Immediately, when Sparky came out to the mound and Dick Allen was on the on deck circle, an old teammate of Sparky Lyle's, Mike Andrews, who was playing at second, or who was on second, told Sparky Lyle, "You're in tough doo-doo." So Sparky Lyle delivered a couple of pitches to Dick, and the third pitch, Dick proceeded to hit a line drive rocket into the left field stands and won the game for the White Sox 5-4. And the remainder of the 51,000 fans there just exploded. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in Comiskey before, even though it was a half of the crowd. It was an incredible roar, like an explosion. And it sort of signified, how special Dick's season was, how he could, he wasn't prepared to be in this game, and he was relaxing. in the whirlpool and in the clubhouse, and just changed the momentum instantly once he was called on to pinch hit. It was probably the high point of the season for the White Sox, who would compete against the A's for the rest of the year, reaching first place in August for a bit. But the A's juggernaut eventually was a little bit too much for the White Sox, who had also suffered because they lost their next best power hitter, Bill Melton, to injury in June. If they had him for that entire season, who knows what would have happened. But the chili dog game of June 4th was just a great symbol for a fantastic season. And it was the event that we lead the book off with because it was such a significant moment in that 1972 season.
In doing some research, for our chat here, I came upon the Phil Rizzuto audio of that home run call on WABC in New York, and he was absolutely incredulous with the fact that the ball went out of the ballpark. He says, I believe his quote was, "I know what happened because I hear that scoreboard going off back there."
Right. Oh, it's a classic call, and I'm glad we have that representing that game. I wish we had the Harry call as well, but haven't been able to find that. But that Phil Rizzuto call where he says, "Oh, I know what happened because I can hear the scoreboard booming." It's just classic.
He dropped a couple of unbelievables.
Right.
John, before we let you go here, what is it about Dick's legend that you learned in writing this book? Anything that you didn't know about him before?
Just the fact that he really had a difficult time, especially during his time in Philadelphia. I believe, just based on the accounts, the newspaper and magazine accounts from 68 and 69, I think he kind of had a nervous breakdown in those last few years in Philadelphia. The pressure just got to him, and then he injured his hand. He pushed it while he was pushing his car up a hill in Philly near his house. He pushed his hand through a headlight and cut up his hand, cut up the tendons in his right hand, and it affected him for the rest of his career. But it really affected him at that time, and he ended up, going AWOL on the Phillies at one point and just taking a cross country drive where he was. He mentions this himself in his autobiography. Talks about, how he just doesn't remember much from that era because he was, drinking so much. So, that's something that I didn't know about Dick, the problems, the real serious emotional and mental toll that he was dealing with during his last few years in Philadelphia. And the other thing that really came to that was really noticeable to me is how appreciative he was of his time here in Chicago. It didn't end well. It ended basically with him retiring because of all his health issues, and he felt that he was just carrying the team in 1974 and couldn't push it over the edge. But he loved his time here in Chicago, and he mentioned he tried to get back to Chicago either with the Cubs or the White Sox after his disappointing stint with Oakland, lobbying local writers to get back somewhere on the north side or on the south side. He loved his time here in Chicago, and I believe, and he's told his immediate family, and he told my co-author that if he ever got into the Hall of Fame, he would really seriously consider going in as a White Sox because he really loved his time here in Chicago, and this was the city, and that was the period where he felt most appreciated as a player.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Where can people get the book? Give us some details or our website.
Well, ChiliDogMVP.com, www.chilidogmvp.com. That's the main website where you can buy a hardcover version of the book. And then also on Amazon, you can get a hardcover version or a Kindle version of the book. So just look for it on Amazon, or better yet, go to www.chilidogmvp.com chilidogmvp.com, and you can buy the book there, the hard copy version of the book on the
Great.
website.
John, I really appreciate it. It's been a great chat. Time just flies by when I'm talking baseball with somebody, and I really appreciate you checking in with us.
Same here, Andy. It's great to talk to you.